Soon it was lunchtime, and everyone scrambled to get their lunch boxes out of their school bags. Miss Hammond let out a long sigh of relief for the short moment of silence as the children ate their lunch. Rebecca was eager to make a friend, and during lunch, she sat next to Madeline. At home, Rebecca was surrounded by boys, especially when Esther's twins went to visit. The only other girl was her cousin Cynthia, but she was much younger and didn't yet know how to play properly. So, to meet another girl her age filled her with excitement, and the two girls chatted animately. Madeline told her that she wanted her to meet her brother Riley, who was in an older class at the school. After lunch, the teachers arranged for everyone to take an afternoon nap. But eating food seemed to have given some of the children the energy to start crying again. Tristan lay down to sleep, but the sound of sobbing and wailing kept him awake. So he got up, and with his hands over his ears, he yelled at the other children. "Shut up!" The sobs eased off a little as the startled children stared at Tristan. They watched as he picked up a stick and smashed it across the towers he had built earlier with the blocks. Then, he kicked the blocks away, scattering them across the floor. The children stared in silence with their jaws hanging open, and Tristan returned to his little bed on the floor and closed his eyes. One little boy started sobbing again, but he didn't dare make much noise. Some others sucked their thumbs and cried quietly under their blankets. Callum was used to his brother's behavior, and he simply shrugged and turned to Jose, who was lying in the bed beside him. "Did you see that? That's my brother. He doesn't say much, but he can be mean." Miss Hammond had momentarily stepped out of the classroom, and she had missed Tristan's outburst. And when she returned, she found all the children as quiet as mice, and she felt a sense of satisfaction. But then she noticed the scattered blocks on the floor, and she frowned. I wonder what happened here. Afraid that someone might step on one of the blocks and fall, she began to pick them all up and put them back in their box. The lunch break, including nap time, was 1.5 hours. Tristan was the first to awaken, and he got up and started to build his tower again. The other children woke up, one by one, but none of them dared to go near Tristan. The afternoon session went much more smoothly, perhaps because of the fear that Tristan had instilled in the rest of the children. Miss Hammond was delighted, and she gave everyone a gold star sticker. The last activity of the day was held outdoors. The children were allowed to play freely in the playground. Rebecca and Madeline went outside together, holding hands. Madeline saw her brother playing on the swing, and she waved him over. He jumped off the swing and ran toward her. Riley was more than 2 years older than Madeline, and to Rebecca, he seemed to tower over them both. The boy looked at the unfamiliar girl with his sister. "Who's this, Maddie?" "She's my new friend. Her name's Rebecca." And then she turned to Rebecca. "This is my brother, Riley." Rebecca gazed up at Riley's face and waved at him. Riley waved back. "My sister's really little, so my mommy told me to look after her, but I can't when we're in class. Can you look after her for me?" Rebecca nodded proudly. She was delighted that the older boy had entrusted her with his little sister's safety. Riley was happy to see that Madeline had made a friend, partly because he was a good big brother, and partly because some of the pressures of looking after her had been taken off his shoulders. The three of them played together for a while longer before Riley had to go back to his classroom. Rebecca and Madeline returned to their own class, where their teacher was playing games with some of their classmates. Tristan was cooperating with Miss Hammond's task and reconstructing his robot at the same time. As for her other brother, he was wrestling with the little boy beside him and teasing him for not understanding the rules of the game. Beau was playing confidently with 2 little girls, while Luke sat at a table of his own, building something with little bricks. Rebecca led Madeline to Beau's side. Of the 4 boys in her life, he was the one she trusted most. "Beau, this is my friend Madeline. I have to look after her in class. We can all play together." Beau got on better with girls than boys, so he was happy to add another girl to his array of new friends, and he immediately drew Madeline into the game he was playing. Not long afterward, the bell for the end of the school day rang, and all the children's faces lit up. They dropped what they were doing, gathered up their school bags, and waited impatiently to be allowed out to meet their parents. Miss Hammond smiled with satisfaction. The day had gotten off to a bad start, but things had smoothed out as they went on, and it had finished well. The mark of success was that no children were in tears by the time their parents arrived to pick them up. Nancy had finished dealing with the emergency at work, and she was able to accompany Jonathan to the school to pick the children up. She met Esther at the school gates, and the two of them talked and laughed as they waited for their little ones to line up and be brought out by the teacher. As part of the youngest class in the school, their children were among the first to be released. Nancy looked eagerly for her three, and she saw Tristan and Rebecca coming out first, holding hands. Callum skipped along beside them with a big, beaming smile on his face. She was relieved to see that they all looked happy and appeared to have had a good first day. Callum saw his mother and ran toward her with his arms outstretched. "Mommy! Hug!" Nancy wrapped her arms around him and lifted him up. He clung to her neck and squashed his cheek against hers. "Mommy, I missed you so much. I cried for the whole day." Nancy hugged him tightly and kissed his cheek. Tristan heard him lying to their mother, but he believed that triplets shouldn't grass on each other, so he didn't tell her the truth. And Callum got the special care and attention he wanted. Seeing that her mother's arms were full, Rebecca ran to her father, who scooped her up in his arms. "Daddy, I want to go higher." Jonathan didn't object, and he happily lifted her onto his shoulders. Rebecca squealed with delight and waved at Madeline from her great height. Her new friend and her brother had been met by a woman whom Rebecca assumed was their mother. Madeline smiled and waved back. Nancy put Callum down and took his hand in hers. Then she took Tristan's in her other hand and started to walk toward the car. "So, boys, how was your first day of school? Do you like kindergarten? Did you make any new friends?" "It was okay," Tristan replied, "but it was a bit boring." "I liked it," Callum said, "and I made a friend." He pointed to a sleek black car that Jose was climbing into. "That's my friend." Nancy looked at the luxury car. This friend of Callum's must come from a wealthy family. Callum continued talking. "Mommy, I want to learn how to box. Can Uncle Norman teach me?" "Why do you want to learn to box, honey?" "Because Jose can box, and I also want to. I want to be able to beat him." Nancy wasn't sure how to react, so she handed him over to Jonathan. "It seems our son wants to learn how to box so that he can become the best fighter in kindergarten." Jonathan looked at his little son and snorted. "All right, buddy. If that's what you want, I'll ask Uncle Norman to show you some moves. I think he'd like a new pupil. But to get you started, I'll take you out for a run in the morning." The next morning, as planned, Jonathan got Callum up early to take him for a run around the block. He was dressed in a sports t-shirt and shorts, and he got a similar outfit out for Callum. The little boy wriggled excitedly as his father helped him get dressed. As they headed downstairs, he was surprised to hear footsteps following behind. He turned and saw Tristan, who had dressed himself in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. Callum was surprised to see his brother and gave him a disdainful look. "Daddy, why is Tristan coming?" "He didn't want to be left out, buddy." Callum huffed. The three of them left the house and went for their short jog around the block. When they returned, Nancy was helping Rebecca to get ready for school. She looked at her muddy sons and frowned. They looked as if they had spent the time running through puddles, especially Callum, who was covered from head to toe in dirt. "Jonathan, can you get the boys cleaned up and ready for school, please?" She sounded a little exasperated, and Jonathan corralled Callum upstairs to the bathroom. Tristan was already there. When they all went back downstairs for breakfast, Rebecca said, "Daddy, I want to go running with you tomorrow too." "Are you sure, honey?" Jonathan looked at her doubtfully. "You don't usually like to get dirty." But she was defiant. "I want to go." "Sure, sweetie. I can't wait to train with all three of you tomorrow." He looked at Nancy, imploring her to say she would go too. But Nancy hated running, and she shook her head. She got all the exercise she needed running around after the triplets every day, so she was quite happy to stay at home while they went out. She pottered about in the kitchen, packing the children's lunchboxes and avoiding eye contact with Jonathan, but she could feel his eyes boring into her back. "I think it would be good for you to set an example with the kids, honey." His tone was neutral, but Nancy knew he would persist until she agreed to go running with them the next day. "We'll all get up early tomorrow, huh?" Nancy sighed and pursed her lips. "I guess." The triplets adapted to kindergarten life very well. Later that first week, when Nancy picked them up from school, she was pleased to see lots of children waving farewell to her three. With Tristan's strong personality, she had been worried that he would be standoffish toward the other kids and struggle to make friends. So she was delighted when they enthusiastically included him in their goodbyes. "It seems I've been worrying about nothing." As they arrived home, she received a message from Emma, which she read as the children ran inside the house. "Hey, Maria, I have to take this Friday off because I've been invited to an event at my old high school. I can't really get out of it, I'm afraid." Nancy sent a quick reply, and then she hurried in behind her children. 2 days later, New York State High held a welcoming ceremony for its new students. Katie had recently finished middle school, and because of her exceptional results, she had been invited to speak as an outstanding student at the welcome ceremony. She had prepared her speech in advance, and before the ceremony began, she rehearsed it one more time in her mind before putting her notes away in her pocket. Then, she joined her classmates, and they made their way to their seats. The front 3 rows were reserved for the most important people taking part in the ceremony. The first row was for the school leaders and guest speakers. The second row was for the teachers, and the third row was for the outstanding alumni who had been invited to attend. Katie found her seat in the 4th row, which was for the top academic students. Everyone else gradually took their seats, and Katie waited patiently for the ceremony to begin. She quickly checked her socials, and then she switched her phone to silent mode. Just as she looked up, she saw the familiar figure of Emma. It had been 3 years since she had last seen her, and she had almost forgotten what she looked like, but it was unmistakably her, and Katie's heart leaped. She must be here as an outstanding alumnus. Emma was wearing a pantsuit with a white blouse and high-heeled shoes. She looked every inch the successful woman that she was. She didn't see Katie as she followed the other representatives and took a seat in the 3rd row. Katie's heart beat fast when she saw that they would be sitting only inches away from each other for the next hour or so. She stared at the back of Emma's head in some kind of trance. She's cut her hair. It used to be longer. Katie recalled all the times she had seen Emma brush a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. She had always been tempted to brush it back for her, but she had never actually done it. Since then, Emma had had her hair cropped short, and there was no longer any hair long enough to fall loose. Emma's former arrogance of youth had gone and had been replaced with an aura of confident maturity. She must be in her mid-20s now. She's about 10 years older than me. One of Katie's friends said something to her, but she was lost in her absent-minded thoughts of the past, and she didn't hear her. Emma was so close to her that she could smell her floral perfume. Katie worked out that it had been more than 1,000 days and nights since she had last seen her, which seemed like a lot. It made her feel as if they had been separated for a lifetime. Emma was oblivious to the fact that for thousands of days and nights, Katie had tried desperately hard to bury the memory of her in a deep corner of her heart. Only occasionally would she bring it out in the middle of the night. Someone on the stage spoke, and Katie was brought back into the present. The school principal addressed the new students in the audience, encouraging them to do their best in their high school years, and then he invited the first guest up on the stage. It was Emma. She smiled pleasantly and made her way gracefully to the podium. "It's an absolute honor to be able to speak to you today at this year's welcome ceremony." She spoke clearly and confidently and gazed directly at the audience. As Emma spoke, Katie heard some boys in the row behind her whispering to each other. "Wow, she's hot." I know. She heads up the research and development team at Brightstar. She's really influential. I know her too. She went to New York University. She did the same course as Jonathan Davis's wife. How do you guys know that? She's so hot, and only a few years older than us. I'm going to try to get her contact details later. Good luck with that, dude. Katie listened to the boys' whispers and felt a pang of jealousy surge through her. She recalled the day she had first set eyes on Emma, and her crush on the older woman had begun. Several years had gone by since then, and the same feeling still coursed through her body. Time hadn't changed a thing. She sighed sadly. I wonder if she remembers me. The audience listened attentively to Emma's speech, and Katie felt herself getting lost in the silky smoothness of her voice. She almost forgot where she was. Emma concluded her talk, and the audience applauded appreciatively. Katie watched her as she returned to her seat. Emma still didn't notice her. Next, 2 more alumni addressed the young audience, and then Katie heard the host announce her. Please give a warm welcome to our top middle school graduate, Katie Davis. Katie took a deep breath to calm her nerves and made her way to the stage. She hoped desperately that Emma would remember her, and she knew she had to give an amazing speech if she had any chance of impressing her. She walked up to the podium and gave the audience a dazzling smile. Hello, student leaders, teachers, alumni, and classmates. I'm Katie Davis, and I'm a freshman. Emma's eyes were fixed on Katie's face. Emma stared at Katie, who stood behind the podium. In the time that had passed since they had last seen each other, Katie had grown up and was no longer a child. She had matured into a graceful young lady. Katie spoke confidently and articulated herself well. She was very different from the crying girl Emma had seen in the hotel corridor years ago. She was also tall, and Emma wondered how much taller she had grown since they had last measured her height. Back then, Katie had only reached up to her shoulders. Katie had also lost her baby fat, and her facial features were refined and exquisite. Emma sighed softly. Time had gone by too fast, and the girl she had always seen as a kid had grown up. She looked at Katie with pride. New York State High produced outstanding students, and she expected that Katie must have graduated as the best student in her class to be invited to speak at the welcoming ceremony. Being a Davis wouldn't have automatically guaranteed Katie's placement at the school, and Emma was sure that she had achieved excellent grades to get in. She smiled faintly, happy that Katie's hard work had finally paid off. Katie delivered her speech flawlessly, but didn't look at her audience. Although she had made many speeches before and had been nervous, that day was different. She thought about Emma sitting in the front row, and her palms began to sweat. Fortunately, she had rehearsed her speech countless times, which had helped her overcome her nervousness. The students applauded and whistled when she finished her speech. The boys applauded the loudest. Katie smiled appreciatively and sighed with relief, glad to have it over and done with. She returned to her seat behind Emma's with a calm expression, but her heart beat like a drum. She sat down, expecting Emma to turn around and greet her. Instead, Emma focused on the stage, leaving Katie feeling both relieved and disheartened. She felt a pang of disappointment and shrugged it off. After so many years, she was used to Emma's indifference toward her. A friend sitting beside her gave her a thumbs up and whispered something. Katie replied softly. In the front row, Emma heard Katie's soft voice, which sounded different from the confident tone she had used when she had given her speech. She was immediately reminded of the Katie she had once known several years ago. It was almost midday when the welcoming ceremony drew to a close. Katie left the auditorium and rummaged in her bag for her phone. She had planned to join her friends at the canteen afterward. Suddenly, a boy nervously approached her. He was tall and thin, but also handsome. His ears and neck turned bright red the moment their eyes made contact. He was holding something in his hands. Hi. I wanted to... He stuttered, unable to finish his sentence. Katie smiled politely. Hi. What is it? The boy gulped. This is for you. he stuffed a small packet of letters in her hands and hurried away. One of Katie's friends had seen the awkward exchange and hurried over to her, giggling. "We've only just become freshmen, and you already have an admirer." Katie blushed and glanced at the letters in her hand, wondering when she would find the chance to return them to the boy. She looked up again and noticed Emma leaving the auditorium with Mr. Harris, the school principal. Caught off guard, Katie and Emma's eyes locked. Katie felt her throat tighten, unsure whether to greet Emma. Mr. Harris smiled broadly when he saw Katie. "Oh, this is our star student. Katie, come over here. I'd like to introduce you to someone." Katie quickly gave the bundle of letters to her friend and smoothed her skirt. Mr. Harris stepped aside to introduce them. "Katie, this is Miss Penn. She works for the Davis Group in their Research and Development Department. She's also involved in the school science camp." Katie gave Emma a perfect smile. "Hello, Miss Penn." Emma nodded. "Hello." Mr. Harris continued. "Katie landed a spot in the science camp after winning third prize in a robotics competition. We usually only take senior students, but she's shown exceptional talent." Emma nodded again. "How interesting. I'll be in charge of this weekend's activities." "Wonderful," Mr. Harris replied. He was very fond of Katie, not only because of her family background, but also because she was modest and had no airs about her. He patted Katie on the shoulder. "We're just about to have lunch. Why don't you join us and get to know Miss Penn better before the weekend?" Katie hesitated. Although she had seen Emma a few years ago at Nancy's house, shortly after the triplets were born, they hadn't spoken to one another. The time before that, Emma had abruptly told her to stay away from her. Katie hadn't forgotten Emma's harsh words and had used them as motivation to forget about her. She smiled and politely declined. "That sounds amazing, but unfortunately, I have homework to do. Enjoy your lunch." Mr. Harris seemed slightly disappointed. "I understand. Maybe next time." Katie watched as Mr. Harris and Emma walked toward the exit before she turned around and went to find her friends in the canteen. The week flew by, and the weekend arrived in the blink of an eye. Katie didn't know what Emma's role at the science camp would be. It was the first time she would be attending and participating in the activities specifically prepared by the Davis Group. It was Saturday morning. Katie packed a small suitcase, and her driver dropped her off at the school gates, where she met the other students going to the camp. Most of the students were boys, and they were in their second or third year of high school. Being the youngest in the group, Katie was well looked after. They boarded the bus, and she sat in the front row next to a boy called Robbie. Robbie was very talkative, telling her everything about the science camp and what to expect. Katie's excitement grew, and she couldn't wait to get there. The Davis Group had started the science camp the previous year. They selected students from all over the country so that they could identify and develop future talent for the company. They also paid for everything, from the accommodation to the materials and equipment required to complete the activities. The high school had assigned several tasks to each student ahead of the camp. The tasks involved working on an artificial intelligence design project for a suburban resort. Students had to work on designs to control automated functions within the resort's homes and service facilities. It was Katie's first science camp, so she could only participate in entry-level tasks. Most older students had already attended a few camps and could work on more advanced tasks. They arrived at the resort after about an hour. Robbie took Katie to the central control room, gave her a blueprint of the resort, and showed her the basics of what she had to do. The students were given a lot of freedom, and Katie could participate in tasks according to her specialties. Each student had also been given a laptop for their tasks, and their work would be assessed at the end of the camp. Robbie boasted that one of the older students who had performed exceptionally well had even been offered a job at the Davis Group. Katie studied the blueprint carefully before selecting her task for the day. The work wasn't easy, and it would be challenging to compete in such a short time frame. Katie immersed herself in her work. She hardly looked up from her laptop and only took a break to eat something quickly. To improve her skills, she had borrowed Nancy's old textbooks, and she studied them every day after she had completed her regular schoolwork. She was an intelligent kid and had mainly taught herself, only seeking guidance from Nancy when she didn't understand the more complex theories. She had also learned how to design robots. Her bedroom was littered with ideas that had either succeeded or failed. It was dark outside by the time Katie had completed her tasks. She double-checked that she had saved her work on the laptop and stood up to go to the canteen. The lab she had chosen to work in was quiet and far from the canteen, so she had to walk through a long, dark hallway. Most other students had already eaten dinner, and the hallway was deserted. All she could hear was the sound of her footsteps on the tiled floor. She suddenly saw a shadow around the corner. Startled, she stopped dead in her tracks and held her breath. Then, she heard the sound of footsteps and saw someone in the dim light. The person was looking at their phone, and the screen lit up their face. Much to her relief, she saw that it was Emma. She exhaled slowly. Emma looked up and saw Katie. She hesitated for a second. "Hello, Katie. Have you eaten yet?" Katie shook her head. "No, I'm actually on my way to the canteen." Emma nodded. "I'll walk with you." Katie smiled faintly. "Thank you." Emma walked ahead, and she followed a few paces behind her. As she watched Emma, she suddenly realized that their age gap no longer seemed so huge. She had grown up a lot since they had last seen each other, and she was almost as tall as Emma. Katie suddenly felt a faint glimmer of hope. They walked into the canteen, and Emma went to the counter to order. Katie kept a respectful distance behind her and waited for her to finish placing her order before approaching the counter. Emma collected her food and found an open table to sit at. Katie glanced around the canteen and saw an empty seat 2 tables away from Emma's. She picked up her tray and quietly sat down. While she ate, she noticed a student approach Emma with a document in his hands. Emma gestured for him to sit down, and they looked at the document together. Watching them reminded Katie of a calculation she had been struggling with all day. But instead of asking Emma for help, she quickly finished her meal, ventured her tray to the counter, and left. She passed through the canteen doors and into the dim, deserted hallway. She paused, reluctant to walk any further, feeling afraid. "Wait up. I'll walk with you." Katie turned around and saw Emma. She smiled timidly. "Thank you." Their shadows formed 2 long streaks across the tiles as they walked down the hallway. They walked in silence and kept far apart from one another. They eventually reached the lab Katie had been working in. Emma glanced out at Katie's luggage. "Haven't you been to your room yet?" Katie shook her head. "No, I came straight here after I picked up a blueprint." Emma looked at her design and then at the calculations on the laptop. She frowned. "The parameters are out. You need to adjust the second one to bring the third one in line with the first." Stunned, Katie glanced at the design and then at the laptop. Her eyes lit up as the solution became apparent. "Oh, I see it now. Thanks, Emma." Katie clasped her hands over her mouth. She realized she had addressed Emma by her first name, which seemed awkward. She hurriedly sat down and began to type, pretending nothing had happened. She corrected the calculation using Emma's suggestion. Satisfied that the task was complete, she closed the laptop and gathered her belongings to leave. Only then did she notice that Emma hadn't left. "Oh, Miss Penn, you're still here." Emma's eyes flickered slightly. "Yeah, you're the last one in the building. It's not safe to leave you alone. Do you know your way around yet?" Katie shrugged. Emma paused for a moment. "I think you should rather work in a different location. This one is too far away from where everyone else is working." Katie nodded. Emma had a point. There weren't many girls among the other students, and she couldn't be too careful. She slipped her laptop bag over her shoulder and leaned over to get her suitcase, but Emma had already picked it up. "Have you got everything?" Emma asked. Katie glanced around the room. "Yeah, thank you." "Okay, let's go." Emma waited for Katie to leave before switching the light off and closing the door. Katie wondered how many times she had said thank you to Emma. The moon shone brightly over the treetops, and it was quiet outside. The resort was still under construction, so nobody else was walking about. There was a chill in the air, and crickets chirped in the darkness. The dormitory lay on the other side of an area overgrown with bushes. Speckles of moonlight lit up a narrow pathway through the large trees. Katie was walking behind Emma, lost in thought, when she suddenly heard a rustling noise behind her. She screeched in fright and instinctively grabbed Emma's arm. Emma's body stiffened for a second, and then Katie pointed to the bushes. "I think I just saw a snake." Emma frowned and activated the torch on her phone. She shone the light into the bushes. Suddenly, a little squirrel scurried past them. Katie watched in astonishment as the creature disappeared into the darkness. She couldn't have made such an embarrassing mistake. She still had her hands around Emma's arm and quickly let go. Katie glanced at Emma, but the light was too dim to see her face. "I'm sorry, I thought it was a snake." Emma didn't say anything and looked away. The touch of Katie's hand on her arm had left a lingering warmth. She also realized that Katie was almost as tall as her. She was about to rub Katie's hair like she had always done, but she stopped herself. It was no longer appropriate. The little girl had grown up, and she had become a young lady and was old enough to start dating and sending love letters. There were boundaries to be kept. Emma smiled faintly. "Don't worry about it. Walk in front of me." Katie nodded and listened to Emma's footsteps behind her. She felt secure and secretly hoped it was a long walk to the dormitory. Katie and Emma reached the dormitory and located Katie's room. Katie looked around and found that it was quite nice. Although it was small, it had everything she needed. There was a large window, a desk, a single bed, and a small couch. She took her luggage from Emma and smiled politely. "Thank you, Miss Penn. Good night." She kept a respectful distance from Emma. Emma nodded. "It's a pleasure. Good night." As she turned to leave, Katie's phone rang. Katie pulled her phone out of her bag and saw that it was Jacob calling. She smiled as she answered. "Hello, Jacob." He had recently written the entrance exam for Houston University and been accepted to study there. Although he didn't want to leave Nancy, he had newfound commitments in Houston. The Franklin Group was still based there, and if he wanted to take over from the current management team, he would have to live there. "Katie, I'm going to Houston in a couple of days. I'm organizing a small farewell party for tomorrow night. Will you be able to come?" "Sure, I'd love to. I'm at a school science camp this weekend, but should return in time." Katie and Jacob had become good friends over the last few years. He was only a couple of years older than her, but he knew much more about life. She valued their friendship and found that he inspired her. She had been surprised to discover that he was quite popular at school. Girls fawned over him and desperately tried to become his girlfriend, but he was only interested in finishing school and in the Franklin Group. He had eventually asked Katie to help him with the girls who kept bothering him. They got along well, and there was nothing they couldn't talk about. Jacob was happy that Katie could make it to his party. "Great. I'll send you the location later. I'm glad you'll be there. I don't think I'll return from Houston for at least 6 months." "Okay, see you tomorrow." Katie smiled as she hung up. She put her phone on her bedside table and saw that Emma had left. She peered around the door and saw her walking down the hallway. She closed the door, slumped down on the small couch, and breathed a sigh of relief. As she lay in bed and tried to fall asleep, she remembered when she had become scared and had grabbed Emma's arm. She could still feel the warmth of Emma's skin on her hands. The following day, Emma told Katie that she had organized a new lab for her to work in, and she also had to work in a group with a few other students. They divided up their tasks and cooperated well. Katie finished her work a bit later than the rest of the group. Robbie waited for her, and the canteen was almost full by the time they arrived to have lunch. They glanced across the room and saw 2 empty seats at Emma's table. Robbie wanted to ask Emma about something, so he dragged Katie with him. Katie sat down and gave Emma a friendly smile. Robbie took the opportunity to bombard Emma with questions and ask for advice on a problem he had had with one of his calculations. Katie didn't understand what they were talking about. Instead, She kept her head down and ate her lunch. Suddenly, a girl approached her and clapped her hands in surprise.
It's you!
Katie looked at her, and although she looked familiar, she couldn't place where she knew her from. The girl seemed excited to see Katie.
Don't you remember me? We were at school together last year.
Katie frowned.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so bad with faces.
The girl laughed.
I once chased after your boyfriend. I didn't know Jacob had a girlfriend, so I sent him love letters all the time. He eventually told me I was wasting my time because he already had a girlfriend.
The girl was friendly and carefree. She didn't seem to feel awkward at all. She smiled and winked at Katie.
I heard he got accepted to Houston University. I suppose you two have a long-distance relationship now. Are you going to his party tonight?
Recognition dawned on Katie's face as she finally remembered who the girl was. She cringed and wanted to explain, but when she saw Emma's calm expression, she decided against it. Instead, she smiled sweetly.
Yeah, I'll go straight there after the bus drops us off at school. Are you also going?
The girl shook her head.
No, I've got other plans. I just remembered my huge crush on him when I saw you. Anyway, enjoy the party. Thanks. See you around.
Katie gave a little wave and looked down at her plate. Robbie poked her with his elbow.
Hey, Katie, you never said that you had a boyfriend.
Katie tightened her grip around her knife and fork. She could feel Emma's gaze on her. A girl sitting next to Emma laughed.
Bad luck, Robbie. I'm sure Katie's boyfriend is tall, dark, and handsome.
Robbie and the girl were obviously good friends, and he teased her back.
Yeah, he's probably much better than the trolls you date.
The girl giggled and changed the conversation. Katie quickly finished her lunch and excused herself.
I have some work to complete before the day is over. See you later.
The girl winked at her.
Yeah, you want to finish so you can see your boyfriend.
Emma gazed absent-mindedly at Katie's empty chair. She was surprised to hear that Katie had a boyfriend. She remembered how Katie had smiled when she had answered her phone the previous night in her room. She was glad that Katie had found someone closer to her age. That afternoon, Emma announced that the bus would collect them half an hour early. Katie packed her suitcase and went outside to catch the bus back to school with the other students. Emma had driven to the resort and was busy putting her bag into the trunk of her car when she saw Katie. Katie smiled at her and waved. She was on the phone with Jacob, confirming the time and address of his party. Emma waved back.
Hey, Katie, do you need a ride into the city?
She had overheard Katie's conversation with Jacob. She put her sunglasses on.
I'll drop you off at your party. I'm going in the same direction. If you take the bus to school first, you'll get stuck in traffic.
Katie hesitated briefly before replying.
Sure, thanks.
The other students knew that Emma worked for Katie's family, so it didn't seem strange that she offered her a lift. Some of them even felt jealous of Katie. They drove toward the city in silence for a while until Emma finally spoke.
Are you nervous about schoolwork?
Katie shook her head.
No, I'm fine.
Emma didn't ask anything else, and Katie said nothing. Deep inside Katie's heart, she had many things to say to Emma, but she didn't want to because of what Emma had said to her that day in Boston years ago. She could still hear the words echo in her mind. She had told Katie to stay away from her. The silence in the car was almost unbearable, so Katie opened her bag and found a robot she had been working on. She always immersed herself in her work, and the robot was a welcome distraction from the intense atmosphere in the car. Emma kept her eyes on the road and stopped at a red traffic light. She glanced at Katie and saw her deep in concentration as she fiddled with her robot. Emma suddenly had a vivid memory. The warm glow of the setting sun lit up a courtyard. She leaned against the wall and tightened the screws of a mechanical object in her hand. Katie looked at her with big, curious eyes.
What did you study at university?
Emma didn't look up.
Artificial intelligence and microelectronics.
Katie didn't know what that meant, but she replied decisively.
Then that's what I'm going to study when I'm old enough.
Emma snorted in contempt.
thinking it was just a casual remark. Years had passed since that day, and the young girl had blossomed into a beautiful young lady, but she was still just as sweet and stubborn as back then. All of a sudden, something occurred to Emma. Katie had been following her. Her heart sank, and she glanced at Katie's serious face. She remembered the day her father had passed away. Katie was just a young teenager and had taken the speed train by herself to Boston to see her. Katie was the Davis family's princess. She had grown up sheltered and protected and had never been alone on a long journey. Yet she had dared to travel across the country, hoping to see Emma one last time. The car behind them suddenly honked its horn, startling Emma out of her thoughts. The traffic light had turned green, and she quickly accelerated. Katie sat quietly beside her and continued working on her little robot. When they reached the restaurant where Jacob was hosting his party, Emma parked the car and switched off the engine. "We're here." Katie looked up in surprise. That was fast. She packed away her tools and the little robot and smiled at Emma as she climbed out of the car. "Thank you, Miss Penn." Emma frowned. "You don't have to thank me." She also got out and took Katie's luggage out of the trunk. Katie expected her to pass it to her, but to her surprise, Emma carried her luggage up the staircase and placed it at the restaurant doors. She turned to Katie. "That was a fun weekend." Katie wanted to thank her again, but she smiled instead. "Yeah, drive safely." Emma nodded and walked back to her car. Katie was about to go into the restaurant when she saw Jacob come outside. He had grown much taller and his shoulders had broadened. He was wearing a white t-shirt and dark blue jeans. His jeans were neither loose nor tight, fitting his long, lean legs perfectly. He beamed when he saw Katie. He picked up her luggage and patted her on the shoulder. "I'm glad to see you. Let's go. Henry was asking what time you'd arrive." She smiled at him and followed him into the restaurant. Emma glanced at Katie one last time before she started the car and drove away. Jacob had reserved a large table at an upmarket restaurant. Katie recognized many of his school friends. They sat around the table and chatted excitedly. Most of them had also been accepted into university, and the party would be the last time many of them would see each other for a long time. Henry saw Katie and waved at her. "Hi, Katie. Sit here with us." "Jacob saw you arrive and ran out to find you." He grinned at her. "What's inside your bag? Have you brought a gift for me?" Katie giggled. "Yeah, kind of, but it's not finished." She paused for a moment. "I'll have to give it to you next time." Henry laughed. "Yeah, I'll probably forget about it. Did you at least get something for Jacob? He said he won't return from Houston for quite a while." She nodded and opened her bag to take out a couple of little robot figures. She also took out the robot she had been working on in the car. It was bigger than the others. She gave the little robots to some of Jacob's friends. Henry gawked at the larger robot. "That one looks cool. Is that for Jacob? What does it do?" "It's a surprise." One by one, everyone activated their robots, and the room was filled with beepy sounds and whoops of excitement. Although Katie's robots only had basic functions and weren't as advanced as those products by the Davis Group, they were unique and different from anything else available in the stores. Servers carrying foods of trays arrived, and everyone eagerly ate the delicious food. The universities had already opened for the semester, and everyone was nervous about starting. Some of them drank too much and became quite drunk. Katie also wanted to order a drink, but Jacob wouldn't hear of it. Instead, he asked the waiter to bring her a fresh orange juice. She felt silly with a glass of juice in her hand, but she shrugged it off and tapped a spoon against the glass to indicate that she wanted to make a toast. When everyone fell silent, she raised her glass. "Jacob, we're really proud of you and wish you the best. We'll miss you." Jacob smiled from ear to ear and clinked his glass against hers. "Thanks. You'd better work hard. Maybe you'll even take over for Maria one day." Katie giggled. "Yeah, I'll try. But she's the best in the business." Jacob raised his eyebrows. "Where's your confidence gone?" He laughed. "I suppose she's a force to be reckoned with. Even her husband says she's strong-willed, and he does everything she says. Everyone burst out laughing, and someone teased Jacob. I heard there's loads of pretty girls in Houston. Do you think you'll be able to control yourself when you get there? Jacob grinned and shook his head. I don't think I'll have time for a girlfriend. He had too many issues to sort out in the Franklin group. He knew he would have to spend half his time studying and the other half working on the company's latest projects. He suddenly remembered a girl he had dated several years ago. Juliana and her family weren't in the same social circle as him, and they had only dated for a short time before calling it quits. After breaking up with Juliana, none of the other girls he had met appealed to him. They were either stuck-up and shallow or overbearing. He had eventually asked Katie to pretend to be his girlfriend to stop the other girls from chasing after him, and it had worked. He gazed at Katie sitting beside him. She had grown up a lot and had become very pretty. She also seemed to be yearning for someone to love her. Katie, take my advice. Don't fall in love until you get to university. Katie blushed. Okay, I'll try not to. He looked at her earnestly. You'll have better choices at university. High school boys are immature, and they're not trustworthy. She nodded. I know. She placed the robot in front of him. This is for you. He picked it up and pressed the button. The robot's eyes lit up and began to talk. My name is Tutu. I belong to Jacob Johnson. He's tall and handsome. He's also single. His favorite hobby is... Everyone howled with laughter, and Jacob quickly turned the power off. He grinned and playfully punched Katie in the arm. Henry gawked at the robot enviously. Katie, I changed my mind. I also want a robot. She laughed at him and took the last robot out of her bag. Here, I made one for you too. This one should suit you. He picked up the little robot and turned it over in his hands, whistling with excitement. The friends chatted happily and slowly began to leave as the evening wore on. They greeted Jacob on their way out and hugged him goodbye. It had become late, and Katie had to go home. Jacob hugged her tightly. Let's see how tall you are next time we meet. I wonder if you'll be any taller. His words reminded her of when she had compared her height with Emma's, and she sighed. She shrugged off the feeling and leaned against him to measure their height difference. Okay, it's a deal. He grinned at her and rubbed her hair. Great, I'll see you soon again. He watched her climb into the car and waited for the driver to close her door before he turned around and walked away. The following day, Nancy took Jacob to the airport. Her eyes were wet with tears. Jacob, don't forget you can call me or Jonathan if you need anything. It doesn't matter what time it is. Just call us, and we'll be here for you. He chuckled. Thanks, sis. I think I'll have more luck with Jonathan than with you. She smirked and tried to kick his shin. He dodged her and grinned. You seem to have become quite violent. How does Jonathan even bear with you? Nancy laughed and opened her arms wide to hug him. A voice announced that the boarding gate for his flight had opened, and Jacob squirmed out of her arms. He smiled at her and said goodbye. She looked at her little brother, who suddenly seemed much taller and more grown up. In her mind, he was still the little boy who had chased her around the house. But she knew life had to carry on and nothing lasted forever. He had reclaimed their family business and would soon become a man. Jacob walked through the security checkpoint and turned around to look at Nancy one last time. He saw her standing where he had left her. He felt the lump in his throat, and his chest tightened as he choked back his tears. It was a bittersweet farewell. 4 hours later, Jacob's flight landed in Houston. He took a cab to the Johnson residence and unpacked his luggage before preparing everything for his first day at university. Suddenly, he heard the house phone downstairs in the entrance hall ringing. Jacob had hired a housekeeper to look after the house, and she hurried over to answer it. Hello? A man with a deep voice spoke on the other end of the line. Is this the Johnson residence? Yes, sir. How may I help you? Is Jacob available? Jacob stood on the landing and watched her. She looked up at him and raised her eyebrows, indicating that the call was for him. Confused, he hurried down the stairs and took the phone from her. "This is Jacob. Who's calling?" The man spoke calmly. "Oliver Williams." Oliver had had a difficult time over the last few years. At first, he had only suffered from occasional headaches as a side effect of the radiation therapy. A few months later, he had started suffering from extreme nausea and intermittent blindness. Eventually, he had become completely blind. One morning, while building a puzzle with Reggie, he noticed that everything around him had become dark. He didn't worry too much and thought his vision would return after a short while. Reggie held a puzzle piece in his little hands.
"Daddy, I don't know where this goes."
Oliver tried his best to see the puzzle piece, but couldn't. He pulled Reggie onto his lap. "Daddy can't find it either. Let's look together." Reggie stared at the half-built puzzle and tried to force the piece into the wrong space. Oliver gestured to Leah to come over. She could tell something was wrong, but was about to ask when Oliver suddenly said, "I have to make a phone call." Leah called the housekeeper, and then she picked up Reggie. "Come here, sweetheart. I'll help you while Daddy's busy." Oliver got up, and the housekeeper carefully led him to his bedroom. He lay down and closed his eyes, hoping his vision would return if he took a nap. But when he woke up the following morning and opened his eyes, everything was dark, and he couldn't see at all. He panicked and called for the housekeeper. Oliver sat in the doctor's examination room and waited for a diagnosis. The doctor sighed. "Mr. Williams, I'm afraid it's bad news. The tumor has grown again. It's pressing against your optical nerves. Unfortunately, the radiation isn't working as well as it did before. Unless we operate to remove it, you'll become permanently blind. It's a risky operation, so you must think carefully about it first." Oliver went home and sat in his study for a long time. He didn't know how to read Braille, and it was impossible for him to handle his business affairs if he was blind. His greatest concern was that his condition would affect the future of the Williams family. Reggie was still a small child and would only be ready to take over after finishing school. Oliver didn't know if he could hold out for that long. He felt a deep sense of disappointment in himself and his life. He reached for his phone to call Esther, but realized he didn't know her number and couldn't see the screen. He locked himself in his study for 3 days. Eventually, Reggie knocked on the door, looking for him.
"Daddy, are you in here?"
Oliver took a deep breath and picked up a cane the doctor had given him. "Yeah, I'm coming." He opened the door and bent down for Reggie to hug him. He then called the housekeeper and asked her to find a reliable teacher to give him Braille lessons. He gradually became used to the darkness around him. His fingers became calloused from learning Braille, and he eventually found a way to continue his work. He also made his household staff and most trusted assistants swear to keep his condition secret. No one else in his company knew that the head of the Williams family had become a blind man. Several weeks later, Oliver had an appointment with his doctor for a checkup. The doctor sent him for a brain scan, and then sighed when he looked at the result. "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry to tell you that the tumor is still growing. It'll soon put pressure on other areas of your brain, which will severely limit your most basic functions. You may even become paralyzed and experience memory loss." It poured with rain as Oliver left the doctor's office. His assistant opened an umbrella and led him to the car, but he refused to get in. He wanted to walk. So his assistant handed him his cane and held the umbrella over his head as they slowly walked in the rain. Oliver lost track of time. His shoes and pants were soaking wet, but he didn't care. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and cocked his head to the side as if trying to listen to something. In the distance, he heard a little girl call out to her brother.
"Hey, big brother, wait for me."
He felt a chill run down his spine. The little girl's voice reminded him of someone. He thought about it for a while until he realized she had sounded just like Nancy Johnson. When they were young, Nancy had often gone to the Williamses' house for playdates. She had been much younger than him and had called him Big Brother. He stood in the rain and sighed. Then he turned to his assistant. "Take me home." His assistant nodded and gestured to the car that had been following alongside them. The driver pulled over and the assistant helped Oliver climb in. After they arrived back at Oliver's sprawling estate, the housekeeper helped him upstairs to his room. He didn't bother changing out of his wet clothes. Instead, he picked up his new phone, which had been specially designed for visually impaired people, and dialed a number. Even after so many years, he still remembered the Johnsons' residential phone number. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Jacob finally spoke.
Oliver? Should I call you friend or foe?
Oliver sighed.
Call me whatever you like.
Jacob took a deep breath and exhaled slowly.
You have some nerve phoning me.
In his dark world, Oliver grimaced.
What do I have to do for your forgiveness?
Jacob burst out laughing, but it was a cruel, angry laugh.
There's nothing you can do. Even if you kneel over dead, I'll never forgive you.
Jacob was furious that Oliver had the audacity to contact him and ask him for forgiveness. The Williams family had been responsible for the murder of his parents and his sister.
I'm sorry, Jacob. I'm flying to Houston tonight, and I'll prove to you how sorry I am.
Oliver hung up the phone and called his assistant.
Contact the travel agent. Tell her to book tickets for the next flight to Houston.
Oliver, his assistant, and his bodyguards flew straight to Houston that night. The flight felt long, and they arrived early the following morning. Although Oliver had lost his vision entirely and found daily life challenging, he didn't tell anyone, apart from his most trusted assistant and household staff, because of his pride. Esther and Reggie didn't know, nor did the employees in his company. Oliver walked through the airport dressed in a light linen suit. He didn't use a cane. Instead, his assistant walked closely behind him. His world was dark, and he used the sound of his assistant's footsteps to gauge which direction to walk in. The airport was busy, even though it was very early and the sun had just started to rise. Oliver's bodyguards were tall and wore smart suits. Their appearance attracted a lot of attention. They met the driver waiting for them outside and went straight to their hotel. Oliver didn't say much, but as they neared the hotel, he instructed his assistant to go to the nearest florist and buy 3 chrysanthemums, which symbolized friendship, happiness, and well-being. Jacob struggled to fall asleep. Oliver's call had unnerved him, and the conversation played over in his mind. He was used to staying up until late at night, so despite having struggled to fall asleep, he woke up in good spirits, ready for his day of university. As was customary, he visited his parents' graves whenever he arrived in Houston. After eating an early breakfast, he left the house and went to the cemetery. He took beautiful bouquets of flowers with him. Jacob had visited the cemetery many times, and the last time had been when he and Nancy had taken the triplets with them. The cemetery was quiet and serene. Occasionally, an insect buzzing from flower to flower or a bird chirping interrupted the stillness. Jacob approached his parents' grave and noticed a lone figure standing before them. The man was wearing a smart black suit, and he looked lonely. He bent down and placed chrysanthemums next to the tombstone, and then he straightened up and turned around. The soft morning light lit up his face, and Jacob immediately recognized him, but he couldn't place where he had seen him before. He walked up to the man. "Good morning. Who are you?" Oliver recognized Jacob's voice. It was a fortunate coincidence to run into Jacob at the cemetery. It saved him the trouble of going to the university to find him. Oliver took a deep breath. "I'm Oliver." Jacob felt a chill run down his spine, and he froze. He distinctly remembered what Oliver looked like, even though there was an age difference of several years between them. Time had taken its toll on Oliver. When they had first met, Jacob had been in kindergarten, and Oliver had already started high school. Nancy had taken Jacob with her one day when she had gone to the Williamses' house for a playdate. He recalled that Oliver hadn't said much and had come across as cold and aloof. Jacob played with Oliver's cousin, Dan. It had been fun playing with Dan. Although he had been in his 3rd year of high school, he had enjoyed kicking a ball around and even taught Jacob a few tricks. Jacob had a good memory. One of his earliest memories was of when he was 2 or 3 years old. After discovering the truth about his parents' death, Oliver's face had been deeply ingrained in his memory. He glanced at the flowers next to the tombstone, and his knuckles turned white as he tightened his grip around the bouquets he held. He remembered that Oliver had been tall, and as a small child, he had wondered if he would ever grow as tall as him. But he had grown, and they were about the same height. Jacob stayed calm, not wanting to lose his temper in front of his parents' graves. He ignored Oliver and leaned over to place the flowers next to each parent's tombstone. He had only brought 2 bouquets, one for his mother and one for his father. He hadn't brought flowers for Nancy's grave. The grave was empty. The ocean had taken her body, and she lived on as Maria. When he thought of Nancy, he felt like he would lose control and lash out at Oliver. Stark had died, but Oliver was still alive. Although Arthur had been responsible for everything that had happened to his family, Oliver had also been there. They had been family friends. Instead of warning his family or doing something about it, Oliver had simply stepped back and watched how the Johnsons had been destroyed. Jacob swallowed hard to compose himself. He looked at his parents' name etched into the granite and sighed. He was almost a man, and he was no longer the boy who needed to be protected by his parents and sister. He was also the head of the Johnson family, and it was his turn to care for his sister and her children. He made up his mind to deal with Oliver by himself. He didn't care what he had come for, and he resolved not to grant him anything. He glared at Oliver. "Is there something you want from me?" Oliver nodded. "Yeah." Jacob frowned. "You didn't have to come to my parents' graves. You could have met me somewhere else. I don't think my parents want you here either." Oliver glanced toward the graves, but all he saw was darkness. "I'm sorry." He pursed his lips together. "I've come to apologize for what my family did to yours." He solemnly bowed his head. Jacob felt his blood begin to boil. He couldn't hold back anymore, and without thinking, he punched Oliver. Narrowly missing his face, his fist landed squarely on the side of Oliver's head. Oliver winced and staggered back a few steps. An excruciating pain shot through his head, and his ear buzzed. Jacob's eyes glistened with tears. "What gives you the right to come here and apologize? Your apology means nothing. It won't bring them back." The pain made Oliver nauseous. He felt dizzy and his head throbbed. He suddenly felt warm liquid ooze from his nose. He tasted the metallic taste of blood in his mouth as his nose bled onto his shirt. Jacob looked at him in astonishment. His chest rose and fell as he heaved with anger. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to calm down. Jonathan had once told him that it was sometimes necessary to be discreet and not let people know how you feel about them. He had said there were ways of dealing with people one didn't like, and the best option was to get rid of them as quickly as possible without attracting any attention. Jacob's emotional outburst had resulted from his stubbornness and cowardice. He needed to work on controlling his emotions better. He leaned close to Oliver. "Get lost." But Oliver didn't move. He gazed in Jacob's direction and calmly asked, "Jacob, what must I do for you to forgive me?" He would do anything to live long enough for his son to grow up. Whatever happened afterward didn't matter. Jacob smirked at Oliver's plea. He glared at him, and a scornful smile spread across his face. "Mr. Williams, let me be the first to tell you that my forgiveness isn't worth as much as you think. I've heard what you've done in Cuba. More than 2 or 3 people have met their deaths because of you. Why do you suddenly need to atone for what your family did?" Oliver felt he had been stripped of the pride and dignity he still had left in him.
I know you hate me. I just want to know what it will take for you to forgive me. I don't care how difficult it may be. I'm willing to try.
Jacob stared at him in silence. He tried to read Oliver's facial expression, but he found nothing. He looked away in disgust.
Leave. You're not welcome here. I'll never forgive you unless you bring my parents back.
Oliver sighed, but something suddenly occurred to him. Jacob had only mentioned his parents, but not his sister. It surprised him, because he had always thought Jacob and Nancy to be close.
Your sister,
Oliver started to say. Jacob quickly cut him off, realizing his mistake.
Don't speak of her. Her body was never found, and I still believe she'll return one day.
Oliver knew that Stark had set the yacht alight. Nancy would have been burned to death and buried deep in the ocean along with the wreck. His lips curled slightly when he thought that Jacob imagined that his sister was still alive. He squared his shoulders and took a deep breath.
I'm very sick. The only cure is a prescription from the Jung family.
Jacob gave a bitter laugh. He now understood Oliver's true motives.
Yeah, I expected something more to this.
Why would the powerful head of the Williams family grovel for forgiveness if there wasn't something in it for him?
Name your price, Jacob.
Jacob scoffed.
You're in a precarious situation, aren't you? Your son is still too young to inherit the family business, and it'll be disastrous if you die before he's old enough to take over. Your family will fight like wolves to claim their share of the pie. They'll rip the business apart, and there'll be nothing left.
I wonder what will happen to Reggie.
He's your only heir, isn't he?
Wouldn't it be tragic if something happened to him? Like an accident? I'm sure plenty of envious people out there would stop at nothing to remove him from the equation. Jacob paused for a moment to catch his breath, and then chuckled. So you think telling me you're sick will change anything? Don't you know that I want nothing more than to see the destruction of the Williams family? I want your family to be ruined, just like my family was destroyed. Oliver sighed heavily. Jacob's harsh words stung. The timid young boy, who had become mute after witnessing Stark murder his mother, had grown into a young man who was calm and confident. He hoped his son would one day grow up to have Jacob's conviction. My request for your forgiveness is sincere, Oliver replied. I know you detest me because of my family. It's not my intention to avoid responsibility for what happened. And although I didn't kill your family myself, it's my fault for not doing anything about it. He turned toward the graves and bowed his head again. Edward, Lily, I'm truly sorry. I was wrong. I know it doesn't help for me to apologize, but I don't know how else to repent. Jacob shook his head and turned around. I'm leaving now, and so should you, before you spoil this place with the blood on your hands. He made his way over to Nancy's grave in the pretense of paying his respects to her. As he walked, he heard footsteps on the paving behind him. He didn't turn around, but saw Oliver in the corner of his eyes. Oliver followed him slowly and walked hesitantly as if he were looking for something. Jacob sneered, astonished that he would pretend to be injured by one punch. Oliver's nosebleed had stopped, and the dried blood had caked around his nostrils. Oliver didn't gesture for his assistant to help. Instead, he listened to Jacob's footsteps as he cautiously walked behind him. The path was uneven, and there were places where the paving had lifted. Jacob walked fast, and Oliver struggled to keep up. Caught off guard, he tripped and stumbled, just barely managing not to fall over. Jacob turned to look at him. He seemed to be in a sorry state. Yeah, I guess you do look sick. Oliver didn't say anything. He tried to catch up and stop walking when Jacob did. They had reached Nancy's grave, but Jacob didn't stand before it. Instead, he looked into the distance and smiled. Hello, sister. Oliver couldn't see where they had stopped. He guessed they were in front of Nancy's grave, so he bent down and placed the last bouquet of chrysanthemums on the ground. Jacob looked at the flowers and then at Oliver, stunned. The flowers lay in the middle of the pathway. He wondered if Oliver was so sick that he couldn't walk any further. But it was what he did next that left Jacob astonished. Oliver faced the pathway and bowed his head solemnly. "Nancy, I'm sorry. I should have done something, and I didn't. Esther hated me for a very long time. I can't tell you how sorry I am for what happened. I hope you'll forgive me." Jacob's mouth hung open, and then it dawned on him. Oliver was blind. He raised his hand and gestured at Oliver. His movement was subtle, and he didn't make any sound. As expected, Oliver didn't react. Jacob gloated. Fate had a way of dealing with good and evil. Oliver had paid the price for his family's sins. But Jacob's happiness at Oliver's fate was short-lived. It didn't change the fact that his family was dead. Even if Oliver died, it didn't make a difference. Edward Johnson, the famed neurosurgeon, was dead. Lily Johnson, founder and CEO of the Franklin Group, was dead. And although Nancy had been reborn as Maria, she had also been murdered. The Johnson family, as everyone knew them, were gone. Oliver's blindness didn't remove the desolation and pain buried deep in Jacob's heart. He took a deep breath. He refused to allow the son of his family's murderer to upset him. Jacob walked 2 steps forward and bent over to wipe the dust from Nancy's tombstone. Then he turned around and left. Oliver had only heard Jacob's footsteps and didn't know that he had placed the flowers in the middle of the pathway. When he heard Jacob leave, he tried to follow him. "Jacob, wait. I'm truly sorry." But Jacob didn't reply. He held his head high and continued to walk, leaving Oliver far behind. Instead of going home, he went straight to the university. It was his first day, and he wouldn't let Oliver ruin it. He smiled excitedly as he walked through the gates and saw students milling about. Jacob was ready to start his life. Oliver hadn't expected Jacob to forgive him. After all, the boy had lost his entire family and was the sole survivor. It would take a lot more effort to win him over. Oliver believed he had some time left. Although he had become blind, he was still alive. The doctor had estimated that he would have at least 2 more years before he would start to lose his memory and mobility. Oliver decided to dedicate everything he had to fight for what he wanted. After leaving the cemetery, he stayed in Houston and attended to his business from there. He sat in his hotel room and reviewed a document that had been transposed into Braille. His phone rang. It wasn't the standard ringtone, but one specifically set up for a particular caller. He answered it immediately. On the other end of the line, the person said, "There's still no sign of them." Oliver grunted and hung up. He had sent a team to find Zoe and his daughter, and after 3 years of searching, they still hadn't found them. The team reported to him monthly, and the result was the same each time. Oliver had become used to not receiving good news, but his patience had run thin after seeing Jacob that morning at the cemetery. He realized that his daughter would be over 3 years old by now. She would be old enough to have her thoughts and opinions in just a few more years. The loss of Zoe and his daughter haunted him. The scene of them falling off the cliff replayed in his memory time and again. It was the only thing he could see in his world of darkness. The vivid memory was like a dagger in his heart. Zoe bid a tearful goodbye to Josephine. She held her little girl in her arms, and tears rolled down her cheeks. It was difficult to leave the small town. Zoe had no money, and Josephine had given her everything she had earned from the fish she had sold. Apart from the few wealthy families in Havana, the rest of the population lived in poverty. Life was changing, and money was scarce. Zoe had tried to find work, and she had submitted her resume to countless prospective employers, but it had no success. It seemed like she had hit a dead end whichever way she turned. She didn't have any identification, and it was impossible to secure a job or a place for Layla at kindergarten without it. Josephine had eventually suggested that Zoe use her late daughter's identity, and so Zoe had changed her name to Joanne. Joanne had only finished junior college before she had gone to look for work. She had passed away, leaving the widowed Josephine without anyone. Using Joanne's identity, Zoe finally found a job as a nanny and a community kindergarten for Layla. Because she was a full-time nanny, she would be provided board and lodging for her and Layla. Zoe said farewell to Josephine and moved to Santa Clara. Fortunately for her, the job wasn't too demanding. Her employer, Isabella Torres, was hardly home, and she only had one child, a little boy named Bruno. Bruno was only a few years older than Layla and was still in kindergarten. Zoe was grateful that she would be able to care for him and Layla without too much trouble. Isabella sized Zoe up on her first day of work and gave her some money to buy new clothing. Layla gazed at the charming, well-dressed Isabella with large eyes. Although she was a little shy, she smiled sweetly as she greeted her. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Torres." Isabel nodded and explained how her household was to be run. "As for Bruno, he can be difficult. It's best to give him some space and be patient." She called Bruno out of his room to meet Zoe and Layla. He was much taller than Layla and had pale skin. He was also unfriendly and came across as unkind and spiteful. He gawked at Layla and scrunched his face in disgust. Zoe smiled calmly. "Layla, this is Mrs. Torres' son, Bruno." Slightly wary of him, Layla shyly introduced herself. "Hello, Bruno. My name is Layla. It's nice to meet you." Bruno stared at her and then stuck out his tongue. He turned around and hurried back to his room. Isabella ignored him and gave Zoe a few instructions. She had a business trip to go on and would be away for a few days. She picked up her luggage and left the house without saying goodbye to Bruno. Zoe and Layla decided to explore the house. It was a double-story building with a kitchen and living room on the first floor and the bedrooms, study, and gym on the second floor. There was also a small basement. Zoe and Layla went to their room and unpacked their bag. They were so poor and had so little that they only had one bag. Then, Zoe took Layla to kindergarten to register her. Fortunately, the school was within walking distance from the house. The following morning, she quickly walked Layla to school before taking a taxi to drop Bruno off at his executive private kindergarten. Bruno didn't say a single word for the entire trip. He scowled and glared out of the window, disappointed at the world. Zoe tried to coax the little boy into conversation, but eventually gave up. After dropping him off, she caught a bus to the local shopping mall. She bought new clothing for Layla and herself, and then went to an internet cafe. She logged into a chat app and contacted an old acquaintance from university. They hadn't spoken for years, and after first telling her what she had been up to, her friend asked her about her life. Zoe told her friend she had been in trouble and had had to leave home. She said she didn't want to cause more problems for her mother, but desperately needed to find out if she was okay. She also swore her friend to secrecy. Her friend kindly agreed and added that she had become engaged and would get married the following month. Zoe congratulated her friend. She realized that since she had chosen to be a surrogate, she no longer had the option of pursuing a normal life as her friend had. She had come to terms with the fact that she would always be a single mother. Watching her daughter grow up also made her realize that as long as they had their health, they needed little else. Bruno's kindergarten closed at 5 in the afternoon, so Zoe first bought groceries before picking him up. Bruno was a tempestuous little boy who insisted on seeing Layla's school, wanting to compare it to his. When he arrived at Layla's modest school, Bruno frowned and stuck his nose in the air, but he didn't say anything. He quietly waited for Layla to put on her shoes and gather her belongings. Layla was a friendly child who loved interacting with other children and had already made friends with some of the children in her school. When one of her new friends saw Zoe and Bruno arrive, they innocently asked, "Who are they?" Layla happily introduced them. "This is my mommy, and this little boy is Bruno. My mommy works for his mommy." Bruno snorted rudely. Layla's little friend smiled politely.
"Layla, where's your daddy?"
Unfazed, Layla quickly answered.
"My daddy is a hero. He was a firefighter. My mommy says he sacrificed his own life to save other people's lives."
Layla's little friend scrunched her face in confusion.
"What's a hero?" What does sacrifice mean?
Bruno chewed his fingernails and groaned impatiently while Layla explained.
Mommy says a hero is someone who shows great courage.
She paused, and a sad look crept across her face. She shrugged.
She said there was a fire and people were trapped in a building. My daddy died saving them. I think that's what a sacrifice means.
Her friend saw the sadness in her eyes and gave her a comforting hug.
It's okay. We can still be friends.
Layla smiled happily. She had been nervous about going to kindergarten, and Zoe had told her she'd meet new friends there. Her mother had been right. Annoyed, Bruno stomped his feet impatiently and walked out, but Layla quickly followed him.
Bruno, come back!
Bruno scowled. He didn't care for her. He ignored her and stormed off. Zoe picked Layla up and hurried after him. On the way home, Layla occasionally glanced at Bruno because she wanted to talk to him, but every time their eyes met, he looked away. She soon realized he would be difficult to get along with and was nothing like the children in her kindergarten. Before they had left the small rural town, Josephine had told her to be a good girl and make her mother proud. She had also said that her mother had to work and she had to behave so that her mother wouldn't lose her job. Layla had listened, while Isabella had told Zoe it was her job to take good care of Bruno. So, in the little girl's mind, it was her job to take care of Bruno too. They finally arrived home, and Layla approached Bruno. She gave him a piece of candy that one of the children in her school had given her.
Here, Bruno, you can have this.
Layla had been reluctant to eat the candy because she had never had anything like it. It was wrapped in pretty paper and looked delicious. Bruno rolled his eyes and seemed annoyed. He grabbed the candy from her and threw it onto the floor. It rolled under a cabinet. Taken aback, Layla quickly ran over to pick it up, but her arms were too short to reach. She looked back at Bruno, but he ignored her and played with his toy car. She didn't understand why he was being so mean. Zoe was cooking dinner in the kitchen while the children were playing in the living room. Layla watched Bruno push his toy car around the room and tried to think of a way to play with him. She sat and stared at him until he finally noticed her. He pouted for a second before pushing the car to roll past her. He pointed to the car and she quickly fetched it and gave it back to him. He looked at her and pushed the car past her again. Layla obediently got up and fetched it for him. They continued to play their little game until Layla was exhausted. Zoe called them for dinner, and the hungry children ate everything on their plates. That evening, Zoe went to the study. Isabella had told her about an old computer that she no longer used. She had said Zoe could have it if she wanted to. Zoe had been to university and had completed a few software design modules. Although she hadn't touched a computer for several years, she decided it was time to get back into it. She had spent a lot of time thinking about her future. She didn't have the qualifications to apply for a professional job, but she hoped she could eventually offer freelance services at a discounted rate. She would work as Isabella's nanny and do private work to save money. She wanted to save enough to send Layla to a decent school one day. Zoe left the children in the living room to play while she went upstairs. Layla wanted to carry on playing the car game with Bruno, but he had lost interest. He picked up his car and began to disassemble it. She didn't know how to help him and didn't dare get too close. Instead, she sat nearby and watched him. He ignored her and soon became lost in his little world. Zoe went downstairs and told the children that it was bath time. Bruno was old enough to bathe alone, so he didn't need Zoe's help. She ran the bath in his mother's bathroom for him while she used the other bathroom for Layla. Layla had never bathed in a proper bathtub before. Josephine's bathroom had only a small shower. The little girl gasped when she saw the bathtub full of water, and she squealed with excitement. She climbed in and floated in the water. She hoped that Bruno would like her one day. She didn't want her mother to lose her job. If they stayed, she could play in the bath every night. She suddenly thought about Josephine and felt a bit sad. She was too young to understand why her grandmother had had to stay behind. A month passed, and Zoe and Layla had settled in well. Zoe had established a routine, and she collected Bruno before fetching Layla. The topic for the week at Layla's school was family, and the children had had to draw a picture of their father that day. She had drawn a tall man with dark hair and proudly showed the picture to Zoe.
Mommy, is this what my daddy looked like?
Zoe smiled kindly. It's perfect. The only thing missing is his fireman's helmet. I'll help you draw it when we get home. Layla beamed happily and turned to Bruno.
Where's your daddy?
Zoe looked at the little boy, curious to hear his answer. She had been wondering about Mr. Torres. Isabella had never mentioned him, and neither had Bruno. She looked at Bruno and saw a deep frown on his little forehead. He fidgeted with his buttons, not wanting to answer the question. Zoe realized that there was much more to it than just an absent father. Isabella worked long hours and was seldom home. She had been away on business for a few weeks and hadn't called home in a long time. Zoe thought it strange that she couldn't make time to phone her son and speak to him, even for a few minutes. Bruno was still too young to have a phone, and there wasn't a landline in the house. The only way Isabella could reach Bruno was to phone Zoe. But in the time that she had been gone, Zoe had only received one phone call from Isabella's secretary to tell her that she had transferred money to her for the household expenses. The secretary hadn't even asked how Bruno was doing. Zoe looked at the little boy and felt sorry for him. She also understood why Bruno behaved the way he did. His father was absent, and his mother showed him no love. He was just a small child, and he probably felt that his parents had abandoned him. She and Layla may have been poor, but they had love. Zoe knew she had to be more patient with Bruno. Zoe hadn't expected to hear back from her friend until after the wedding, so she was surprised when her friend contacted her sooner than she had said she would. Her friend had gone to Havana to see Zoe's mother and phoned her one evening with good news. Her mother's operation had been a success, and she had slowly started to regain the use of her legs. Zoe sighed with relief, glad that Oliver had kept his promise. She wondered how Reggie and Oliver were doing. She secretly hoped that they had gotten along, and that Oliver had given him a reasonable excuse for not having a mother. Zoe had made up the story about Layla's father being a firefighter because she didn't want her daughter to grow up thinking that her father never loved her. She tried to paint Layla's father in a good light so that his absence wouldn't cause her too much sadness. There was no reason to tell Layla the truth. She was too young to understand in any case. Zoe gave the children a bowl of fruit to nibble on while she checked her emails. Layla had grown used to Bruno's indifference and sat beside him quietly. Zoe opened her emails and was pleasantly surprised to discover that she had landed her first part-time job. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start, and she felt proud of herself. Thousands of miles away, in New York, Rebecca and her brothers had finally settled into kindergarten. Rebecca enjoyed school. When they arrived each morning, the other children made sure that no one sat in their seats, and they never had to jostle for a place to sit. She didn't like that Bo, the chatterbox, had started to play with Maddie. Rebecca sat between Maddie and Bo, and his non-stop talking annoyed her. She glanced at Luke. He looked most handsome that morning. The children made paper airplanes, and she went outside to test hers. The sun shone on her, and she felt warm and cozy. She sat on a small step and fiddled with her plane. For some reason, it wouldn't fly. Suddenly, she heard a little boy say, "You folded the wings wrong." She looked up and squinted in the sunlight. An impeccably dressed boy stood in front of her. He wore a smart outfit, as if he had somewhere important to go. He was tall and blocked the sun shining on her. She shielded her eyes and looked down at her airplane. The little boy seemed to be correct. She unfolded the wings, changed the angle of the folds, and realigned them before she folded them again. She smiled at the little boy. "Thanks." He was a few years older than her, and he had a light complexion. His neatly combed hair framed his face, and dressed in his smart clothing, Rebecca imagined him to be a prince from a faraway land. He smiled back at her. "You're welcome." She wondered who he was and what he was doing at her school, but she didn't ask. The little boy didn't want to chat, so he gave her a little wave and walked away. She looked up at him as he left, somewhat intrigued. She shrugged and returned to playing with her little paper airplane. The school bell rang, and Rebecca went back inside the classroom. The little boy sat in the last row beside Jose. Jose and Callum had become firm friends since their scuffle a few weeks back. They had become inseparable. Jose introduced the little boy to the others. "Callum, this is my big brother, Kyle. He's almost old enough to go to elementary school." Jose grinned excitedly. "Callum and I are best friends, and I beat him in a fight the other day." Kyle giggled. "So that's why you rush home to practice fighting with Dad after school every day." Jose puffed his chest out proudly. "Yeah, it's just in case I have to fight Callum again." Callum rolled his eyes. He couldn't believe it. His father had told him that everyone is good at more than one thing, and that he shouldn't be distracted by one skill without being aware of the other skills a child may have. He decided he would ask his Uncle Norman to train him harder from then on. Kyle sniggered at Jose. He looked up and saw a pretty little girl walk over to another desk. It was the same girl he'd seen outside earlier. He thought she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She didn't look stuck up or snooty. Instead, she seemed kind and well-mannered. She glanced over at him and sized him up before she sat down. She kept quiet and didn't chatter like the other children did. She also looked smart, like someone who knew what they liked and what they didn't like. Jose noticed Kyle looking at her. "That's Rebecca. She's Callum's sister." Kyle nodded. He repeated her name in his head, making sure he wouldn't forget the pretty little girl's name. Jose had already lost interest in Kyle and started chatting to Callum again. "Kyle and I came to school by ourselves today, without the driver." Callum blinked at him. "Did you come in an unmanned car?" Then he grinned. "I won't tell anyone." It wasn't necessary to have a driver's license to operate an unmanned car, but the regulations stipulated that the operator must be at least 14 years old. Jose shrugged. "Yeah, better not. My big brother knows everything. He's super clever, so he can easily operate an unmanned car." The children chatted happily until the teacher told them to be quiet so she could begin with the next lesson. The last lesson that the triplets had that day was math. Rebecca found it too easy, so she took out a new model from her school bag and began to construct it. She had finished her other one earlier. Next to her, Tristan was focused on building a robot. He found the lesson easy too. Eventually, the math class ended with the sound of the school bell. The children all stood up and formed lines, ready to go home. Rebecca knew that her parents were both away on a business trip, so she and her brothers were going to be picked up by their driver. After the kids had been released from their lines, Callum squeezed forward and pulled his sister over. "Did you see Jose just now? He's going home with his big brother. Just the two of them. No parents and no driver." Rebecca looked toward Jose's family car and instantly caught the eye of his brother Kyle. Showing no emotion, she casually watched him lead Jose into the autonomous car that had been made by the Davis Group. She remembered the car that had picked Jose up a few days earlier and noticed it wasn't the same one. That one had had a driver. Callum tugged at Tristan's arms. "Hey, we should do that too. Why don't we tell the driver that we'll take ourselves tomorrow in one of Daddy's company's cars?" The thought of the three of them driving to kindergarten by themselves thrilled him, and his eyes sparkled excitedly. But Tristan glared at him, and Callum felt that his brother looked very much like his father at that moment. "We're not allowed to use an autonomous car before we're 14, Tristan reprimanded him. "You know that, and I won't allow it." Callum frowned at his brother. He suspected that Jose's parents hadn't given their elder son permission to use their car either, but he still thought it was cool. At pickup the next day, he noticed that Jose and his brother were collected by an ordinary car with a driver. and he smiled to himself. When Jonathan and Nancy returned from their week-long business trip, Brightstar had a new employee. Rose had graduated from university earlier that year. She had studied computer programming, and after graduation, she applied for a position in Nancy's company. Brightstar was developing a new game and required some additional manpower, so Nancy was happy to offer Rose a job. On her first day, Nancy took her into the office and introduced her to everyone. "Hey guys, I'd like you all to meet Rose. She's going to be joining us in the project programming department as an assistant to the backup program team. I'd like you to give her a warm welcome." Everyone smiled and greeted Rose. "It's about time we have some female programmers," someone remarked. Rose looked around and noticed that all her new colleagues were men. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. They were quick to start throwing questions and statements at her. "Welcome on board, Rose. Do you have a boyfriend?" "I could be your boyfriend." Rose smiled and prayed she wouldn't have to deal with sexual harassment every day. "No, I don't." Some of the men high-fived each other, and Nancy had to tell them all to settle down. Dorian had been watching from afar, and he frowned when he heard Rose say that she didn't have a boyfriend. "All right, everyone, let's get back to work." Nancy clapped her hands to get them moving. "And don't let me hear another word from any of you that might make Rose feel uncomfortable, or there will be consequences." Then, she turned to the head of the programming department and told him to go to her office with Rose. The other programmers were surprised to see the new employee follow the boss into her office. Nancy didn't usually have much to do with new members of staff, so they suspected that there might be a family connection. They glanced at each other and knew they would have to curb their behavior in the future. It irked some of the employees when special treatment was given to a senior executive's relative. They questioned the person's qualifications and whether they would be able to do the job they were employed to do. They thought Rose would last a year at most. Rose came out of Nancy's office and passed through the main office. She brushed past Dorian on her way through and pretended not to see him. He tightened the grip on his computer mouse, and his back stiffened as he watched her. Ever since Latham's wedding and the night that he and Rose had spent together, they hadn't seen much of each other. Matthew had passed away, and Dorian had to return to Cuba for a while. By the time he had gotten back, Rose had returned to school, and the two of them had no further chance to meet up. He had sent her a message asking if she would like to see him again, but she never replied, and he hadn't tried again. He felt that perhaps she was right to treat it as a one-night stand. It wasn't love, but he was a bit of a romantic and not the kind of man to leave after the first night. His mother had told him to pretend it hadn't happened, but he had found it difficult to forget that night. And then, out of the blue, they were going to be work colleagues. But despite that, she still completely ignored him. This could get pretty awkward, he thought. She probably thinks I'm the kind of guy who likes to play the field, but I'm not like that. No one in the office knew about his and Rose's secret. Even when Rose had been Nancy's bodyguard, they hadn't encountered each other at work. She had only been in the building once or twice. Most of the time, she had either been dropping Nancy off or picking her up, so she had no reason to go inside. In the middle of the autumn, the Davis Group, Sumoco Corporation, and Brightstar held a joint gala dinner. The Davis Group invited all its clients and business partners, and since the Gonzalez Group had taken control of the domestic transportation resources, its representatives would be attending as special guests. On the day of the gala, Jonathan and Nancy arrived early at the Davis Group auditorium, where the dinner was to be held. The triplets accompanied them, all dressed in their best outfits. The media had been invited on the proviso that no photos of the children were to be printed or published anywhere. Callum was excited to be attending such a grand event. "Jose's coming too," he told his siblings. The children had a vague understanding that their father was working with Jose's father, so it made sense that their classmate would be at the gala. The event began at 7 o'clock. Jonathan went up to the podium and gave a welcoming speech. The children had their section off to the side of the stage. Callum made a face at Jose.
My daddy's better than your daddy.
Jose scowled at him.
No, he isn't. My daddy's the best.
Shut up. Tristan couldn't stand their bickering. Rebecca ignored the boys and gazed up at her father on the stage. Her eyes were filled with pride and love. Kyle watched Rebecca and noted that her expression was different from usual. Jonathan finished speaking and Nancy took the stage. Rebecca sat cross-legged with her chin in her hands and gazed admiringly up at her mother. Again, Kyle watched her reaction and smiled.
I've never seen her smile before. She looks nice when she smiles.
And for a moment, he forgot about everything else. It was Steve's turn to address the audience, and he went up onto the stage to update the guests on a new airplane design that was being constructed at the company's plant in Mexico. For several years, the Davis Group's aircraft manufacturing business in Mexico had been growing steadily. The planes couldn't monopolize the international market the way Sumoco cars did, but their market share was increasing year on year. The Davis Group had been thrilled to collaborate with the Gonzalez Group on such an important project, and Steve proudly brought the audience up to speed. We're honored to be able to cooperate with the Gonzalez Group. The first batch of fighter planes is currently under development. On the big screen behind him was a photo of the aircraft manufacturing base. The base dealt with the research and development of fighter jets, so it was handled separately from the company's civilian aircraft production. It was a top-secret, independent operation, and so its location was kept under wraps. We've reached an agreement with the Mexican government that allows for them to provide us with the protection resources to prevent all military secrets from being leaked. Thus, the base airspace is a no-fly zone for all but our planes, ensuring that no external interference devices or other satellites can capture aerial images of the site. As the base is still in the construction stage, the outline of the factory and its surroundings is not a secret. On the screen was a picture of a desert oasis, a shiny jewel in the yellow sand. Rebecca stared at the screen in wonderment. She had liked planes ever since she had set eyes on one, but she also liked the idea of helping to heal people when they were sick. Her parents had promised Helga that she would start learning some simple healing procedures from her when she was older.
Next time Miss Hammond asks me what I want to be when I grow up, I'm going to have lots of answers.
The big screen began to show a video introduction of some of the fighter jets. Rebecca watched in awe, felt that some kind of spark was burning inside her. She was unaware that a pair of eyes was watching her. Steve completed his speech, and then he invited the CEO of the Gonzalez Group onto the stage. Jose clapped proudly when his father appeared at the podium. He pulled on Callum's arm.
That's my dad.
Rebecca turned to look at Jose, and then she glanced at his brother beside him. She shook her head as she tried to find something that the two boys had in common with the man on the stage. Jose's father spoke for a few minutes, and then he introduced the man who was in charge of the aircraft project. I give you Major General Ben Yates. I trust that with his leadership, the Gonzalez Group and the Davis Group will have a successful working relationship. The audience applauded, and a young man in military uniform walked onto the stage. Then, Jonathan joined them and shook hands with both men. They were like three gods, standing there as everyone clapped and cheered for them. Rebecca looked at the badge on Major General Yates' shoulder and took a mental picture of it. She would ask her father about it later. She wanted to know how important someone called a Major General actually was. The three men left the stage and circulated the auditorium. The reporters scurried around behind them, busily taking photographs. Three of the biggest names in the financial world had appeared together, and the reporters knew it was headline news. They each grappled to be the one to get the best picture and the first published report. The speeches were over, and it was time for everyone to relax and enjoy the rest of the evening. Jonathan and Nancy went to see their children. Rebecca's eyes lit up when she saw her father.
Daddy, pick me up high.
She raised her arms above her head so that Jonathan could lift her. At the same time, Callum threw himself into his mother's arms and nuzzled into her neck.
Mommy, I missed you so much.
Nancy smiled and lifted her son. He buried his face into her hair and wrapped his arms around her neck. Nancy chuckled and kissed him on the cheek. Jose watched the events around him in astonishment. He couldn't believe that the snuggly little boy who was cuddling up to his mother was the same boy who had fearlessly fought with him. He turned his attention to Rebecca, who was being thrown up into the air by her father. She was giggling with delight, and Jose thought she looked like a princess from a fairy tale. Jonathan threw Rebecca up 3 or 4 more times, and then he gently lowered her to the ground. With her face beaming, she looked at Tristan, who was sitting silently beside her. Then, she leaned in toward her father and whispered,
Daddy, I think Tristan wants to be lifted high too.
Jonathan knew that Tristan would never want such a thing, and he looked suspiciously at his daughter. Nevertheless, he picked the boy up and tossed him into the air a few times. Tristan didn't complain, but he didn't appear to enjoy the experience much either. Jonathan and Nancy still had some official things to attend to, so they told the childminder to get the children their dinner, and then they left. Jose put down the car he was playing with and was about to leave the children's area without an adult when he heard his brother's voice.
Jose, where are you going? I'm going to find Daddy to lift me high.
In the banquet hall, Katie was helping to greet the guests with her mother. One hand was linked through her mother's, while her other hand held a glass of orange juice. They greeted the CEO of a company that Katie had never heard of. "Is this your Katie?" the man asked her mother. "The last time I saw her, she was just a child." "That must be, what, 5 years ago? Now look at her. She's a young woman." He sighed sadly. "It makes me feel so old."
I'm a freshman at high school now.
Katie smiled sweetly at the old man.
Yes, time flies.
After half an hour of walking around with her mother and saying hello to numerous people, Katie had finished her drink and needed to visit the bathroom. On her way to the ladies, she heard 2 girls arguing inside. She didn't want to get involved, so she waited outside for a moment. But she desperately needed to go to the toilet, so after a minute or 2, she had no choice but to go in. Just as she opened the door, one of the girls rushed out, hitting Katie hard in her haste. Katie was wearing high heels, and she lost her balance and began to fall backward. She let out a gasp and instinctively reached out to grab something, but there was nothing within range, and she continued to fall backward, expecting to land hard on her butt. But the pain she expected didn't come. Instead, she felt someone grab her wrist, and she landed softly in her rescuer's arms. The world was spinning. When Katie looked up, she looked straight into the eyes of the woman who had caught her. The woman's hand held still onto her slim wrist, while her other arm was wrapped around her shoulder. It was the first time Emma had seen Katie wearing such a seductive dress. She had seen her in her school uniform and in casual clothing, which made her appear much younger. So for the first time, she saw the girl as a young woman. Katie shivered at the thrill of being held in Emma's arms, and Emma was conscious of the softness of the younger girl's body against hers, and a heat rose from deep inside. Emma came back to her senses and helped Katie onto her feet. "Did you slip?" Katie stood up straight and smoothed her dress. "I'm fine." She glanced awkwardly at the older woman. Emma ran her eyes over her and saw the flawless skin on her delicate shoulder and collarbone against her figure-hugging tight dress. Below, her shapely legs protruded from her tight-fitting short skirt and ended in a pair of elegant high-heeled shoes. "I saw you here just now, but you didn't go in. I thought something had happened. I was heading to the bathroom myself." Katie nodded and smiled. "Thanks for just now." She pushed the door open and went into the ladies' washroom. Feeling a little uncomfortable, Emma decided not to follow her inside. Later, when Emma was washing her hands in the bathroom, she noticed in the mirror that something was dangling from her blouse pocket. It was a small pearl earring. She hadn't noticed if Katie had been wearing pearl earrings earlier, but she did recall that the pendant around her neck was a pearl. It must have come off when I caught her. She carefully removed it and placed it inside her pocket. Katie had returned to the auditorium and found her mother chatting with some senior executives. When Emma came out of the bathroom, she looked around for Katie. She had hoped to be able to return the earring to her, but she found her with her mother, deep in conversation with a client, and she decided it wasn't the right time. She watched from a distance. Katie's posture was confident and elegant for one so young, and Emma was impressed. I guess she is a Davis girl. She's probably been trained her whole life for this. The thought of Katie's upbringing made Emma think of her own. Not long after her father had passed away, her mother's mental condition had gotten worse. She had regularly used terrible language to hurt her daughter, and at one point, she had even changed the locks on the doors and refused to let her into the house. Emma had been spurned by all the neighbors, and whenever she had returned to her hometown, she had always had to face those awful reminders. For that reason, she had tried to avoid going home, and on the rare occasion that she had returned, it had been only to visit her father's grave or to look at the house from afar. Then, the previous year, she had received a call from a neighbor saying that her mother had gone down to the river and fallen into the water and drowned. Emma had gone and made all the necessary arrangements for the funeral, but the stark reality of being an orphan had hit her hard. Even at such a difficult time, the neighbors had continued to shun her. She had buried her mother alongside her father, and then she had locked up the old house and left. She had taken care of the family matters over the weekend and had gone to work as usual the following Monday. Her colleagues hadn't even known that her mother had died. Nancy had noticed that her eyes were bloodshot that day and had asked her what happened. She said that she had stayed up all night drinking with her old high school friends, but she had suspected Nancy didn't believe her. She had lost both her parents, and it seemed that she also lost her roots. Usually, she didn't let that kind of sentimental feeling bother her, but when she saw Katie looking all grown up in the banquet hall, arm in arm with her mother, it made Emma feel lonely. What has she seen in me all these years? She has everything going for her. A mother who loves her, a boyfriend who's perfect for her, and a bright future. What have I got? Nothing. As an employee of the Davis Group, Emma had responsibilities at the gala dinner. She forced her thoughts out of her head and got to work. After everything was done, she went looking for Katie, but she had already left. Emma patted her pocket to make sure the pearl earring was still secure, and then she spent some time with the company's clients, answering technical questions. The banquet drew to a close at 11 o'clock, and the guests began to leave. Emma helped the event organizers to pack up, and then she left. Because she had been on duty, she had been careful not to drink alcohol, so she was able to drive herself home. As she turned the corner, she saw a familiar figure. Dorian appeared to have had quite a lot to drink. He was walking unsteadily along the road, trying to hail a cab. There were quite a lot of people waiting for a taxi, but instead of joining the line, he stumbled past all of them and kept going. Emma slowed down and wound down her window. She was about to call out to him and offer him a ride when a taxi stopped in front of him. With a delighted grin, Dorian opened the cab door. But before he could get inside, a girl in the line behind him pushed him out of the way. "Hey, that's my cab. Get to the back of the line." Emma peered through her window and saw that the girl was Rose. Dorian looked surprised to see Rose, and he hesitated for a moment. He wobbled on his feet and held onto the car door so he wouldn't fall. "I got here first. That makes it my cab." Rose's face turned red with anger. "Whoever sits in the car first gets it." And then she quickly pushed in front of him and jumped inside before Dorian knew what was happening. She closed her door and told the driver to go, but Dorian was still holding on to the other door, and before the taxi could leave, he hopped in beside her, almost landing on her lap. "You don't mind if I take a ride with you, do you? Someone stole my car, and I need to get home." "Damn you, Dorian. Get the hell out of here. What do you think sitting on my leg is going to achieve?" Rose glowered at him and pushed him away. Emma saw the events unfold before her and chuckled to herself. She watched as the two people in the taxi continued their heated conversation. Dorian had drunk a lot of wine, and it had made him overconfident and stubborn. "It's not like one of us has never sat on the other's lap before." Rose's anger got the better of her, and she pushed Dorian again. "I can't believe you just said that." "You were my first, Rose." Dorian's attitude changed suddenly, and Rose thought she saw a tear in his eye. "The first time was so precious. Did it mean as much to you as it did to me?"
You're drunk. You don't know what you're saying. The taxi driver had been waiting patiently for his passengers to work out what they were doing, but he decided he had waited long enough, and it was time for him to get back to work. Are you staying or not? Staying. Dorian secured his seatbelt defiantly. Oh, for goodness sake! Rose was so angry that she couldn't be bothered to fight with him any longer. She gave the driver an address and stared out her window, doing her best to ignore Dorian. He shuffled closer to her and whispered in her ear. I've been thinking about our night together for 3 years. The more I think about it, the sadder it makes me feel. You have to be with me, Rose. She continued to gaze out the window. He shook her gently and rested his chin on her shoulder. She felt an unexpected, but not entirely unwelcome, bolt of electricity flow through her body, momentarily paralyzing her. She turned her head toward him. Dorian, you... But her words were cut off when he planted his lips firmly onto hers. The taxi driver glanced in his rearview mirror, afraid that Dorian would vomit in his car. He shook his head in despair when he saw his 2 passengers locked in a passionate embrace. The cab driver tried to ignore the sounds coming from the back of his car. The windows began to steam up, and he had to put the air conditioning on to clear them. He wanted to tell his passengers that the back seat of his taxi wasn't a hotel room. Rebecca fell asleep in the car on the way home that night. She had lots of questions that she wanted to ask her father, but they would have to wait until the morning. The next morning, Jonathan drove the children to kindergarten as usual. On the way, Rebecca asked him about the military rank of the man she had seen at the previous night's gala dinner. Jonathan described the various ranks of the U.S. Army as well as he could, bearing in mind that she was only 3 years old. Sometimes, his children did and said things that made them seem so much older. Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be in the Army, and then I'm going to Mexico to learn how to fly a plane. Jonathan frowned. Sure, honey, but it's not as fun as you might think. The construction of the airbase would be complete by the time Rebecca was old enough to train there, and its operation would be well underway, but it was a heavy militarized zone and highly dangerous. The thought of his only daughter working in that environment bothered him. Rebecca thought of the video she had seen the night before. Seeing those airplanes soaring in the blue sky like that had excited her, and at that moment, she had wanted nothing more than to be able to fly one herself. But Daddy, I really want to. Looking at the seriousness and determination in his daughter's eyes, Jonathan couldn't argue with her. Sweetie, by the time you're all grown up, you'll understand that there are many other choices in this world. By then, you may have changed your mind. The little girl shook her head vigorously and frowned at her father. No, I won't ever change my mind. Their eyes met in the rearview mirror, and Jonathan sighed. Okay, honey. I guess it's your decision. But when you're 7 years old, I'll show you another world. Rebecca didn't understand what her father was talking about. What kind of other world? A real world. What he said left a deep impression on her. It would be another 4 years until she turned 7, and she wasn't sure she could wait that long. She would be finishing first grade of elementary school by then. Can't wait till I'm 7 so I can see the real world. The car pulled up outside the kindergarten, and Jonathan got out. Xavier was there, and he went over to chat once all the children had been safely delivered to the front door of their class. Hey, Jonathan, I need to talk business with you. Can we go somewhere? Sure. Let's go to the office. The two of them left and headed to the Davis Group offices in their separate cars. The group chat was in turmoil. Esther had sent a message that had gotten everyone fired up. Hey everyone, guess what? I'm pregnant. Ashley was the first to reply. Wow, congratulations! How long? Do you know the sex yet? Yes, it's a girl. Nancy had an early meeting and had just entered the conference room when she felt her phone buzzing in her pocket. She had a minute or two to kill before the meeting began, so she checked her messages.
She read Esther's exciting news and responded. Congratulations! That's so exciting! All your dreams are coming true. So happy for you. Then a message from Helga appeared. I've just discovered that drinking a type of plant water can make men more virile. My husband's now better in bed than ever. But I guess your man won't be needing any, Esther. She ended her message with a winking emoji. Helga was pregnant with her second child. Steve had left late for work. He was in his car when he saw the message his wife had posted to the group, and he thought he was going to vomit. He read Nancy's response. You're awesome, Helga. I noticed that a certain someone seemed to be looking a bit more masculine recently. Steve's heart leapt into his mouth. He was horrified at the joke that was going around the group at his expense. Not for the first time, he considered leaving the group chat, but he was afraid that Helga might say more embarrassing things about him if he did. Latham commented next. Aha! So that's how Steve grew muscles. Then Esther remarked, Helga, can you get me some of that special water? I might be pregnant, but I still have needs. Her message was followed by a series of laughing and winking emojis. It was as Esther's message appeared that Xavier picked up his phone and read the chat. Like Steve, he didn't feel too thrilled about being the laughingstock of the group. He was about to type something when a message from Norman appeared. I won't be needing any of that, and I'll make sure my son doesn't either. He'll train hard to be strong and muscular without any medicine. Esther replied, I want my daughter to marry him. No one's allowed to take him from my daughter. Then Jack joined the conversation. Hey, Norman, I've been drooling over your muscles for years, and we've been friends for a long time, so your son should marry my daughter. Xavier clicked on the group profile picture and pulled it to the bottom of his screen. The words, withdraw from the group appeared, and his fingers hovered over the red button. Right at that moment, a car shot across the road in front of him, and his body jerked forward as his driver slammed his foot on the brakes. The sudden movement caused Xavier's finger to press the red button, and he inadvertently removed himself from the group. A message popped up on everyone's screen. Xavier has left the group chat. Nancy's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly commented, Hey, Esther, it looks like your man isn't happy with our conversation. He's left the group. It was time for Nancy's meeting to begin, so she put her phone away and put the group chat to the back of her mind. Esther was astonished that Xavier had left the group for something that, to her, seemed so insignificant. He might as well change his name to Sourpuss Sloane. Helga jumped in to confront her. Don't worry, Esther. He'll come round. Then Jack responded, Even if he wants to have his way with you, you can play your trump card now. His message was followed by a laughing emoji. Since Hannah was expecting her first child, she had been added to the group, and for the first time, she was able to join in with the baby conversations. She ignored the banter and sent a message aimed at Esther. Maybe our babies will be able to go to kindergarten together. Esther pushed the issue of Xavier to the back of her mind and replied to Hannah. Yes, that'll be great. We're both having girls. Hopefully they can be best friends. Xavier stared at his phone screen and realized with a groan what he had done. The car was about to pull into the Davis Group parking lot, so he hurriedly sent a message to Nancy, the group administrator. I accidentally left the group just now. Can you add me back in? But there was no response. Xavier squeezed his temples in annoyance. He hadn't liked what Esther had written about him, but he wasn't so petty as to remove himself from the group. But no one was replying to him, and he assumed they must have taken offense to his actions. The car wended its way around the underground parking lot and stopped beside Jonathan's. The two men walked toward the elevator together, and Jonathan sensed that something was wrong. Hey, what's up? Esther's pregnant. Xavier's tone was regretful. I just don't know what to do. He tried to think of how best to explain his situation. Jonathan gave him a look of bewilderment. Isn't that a good thing? Why do you seem disappointed? Like it's come back as a shock to you. Don't tell me you've forgotten where babies come from. Xavier frowned at Jonathan. It took him several seconds to realize what he was saying, and he shuffled awkwardly into the elevator. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." He sounded irritated. Jonathan patted him on the shoulder and gave him a knowing look. "Let's go up and have a chat." They reached Jonathan's floor and headed to his office. Jack brought in some paperwork, and Xavier's opportunity to explain himself to Jonathan was lost. The topic in the group chat had moved on, and the conversation was heating up. Dorian had sent a photo of Rose with a sleeping face emoji. In the photo, she was fast asleep, her hair was messy, and there was saliva trickling from the corner of her mouth. Underneath the photo, he had typed, "The drooling Rosie. I've saved this picture and will use it as my screensaver forever." Then, he had added several laughing emojis. "I'm not sure we can call you the Bright Star Beauty anymore." After posting the photo, he chuckled to himself and uploaded the picture to his cloud, just in case Rose found it in his phone and deleted it. Several moments after sending the picture, he received a response from Esther that consisted of nothing but a series of question marks. Then there was one from Latham. "What the?" Even Peter got in on the act. "Dude, it's all happening in the group today." Dorian wondered why he was suddenly receiving mysterious messages from his friends and was about to switch off notifications when he felt a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach. He pulled up the dialogue box and realized what he had done. His heart flew into his mouth, and he thought he was going to be sick. He had meant to send the message and photo privately to Rose, but he had sent it to the entire group. He tried desperately to delete it, but it was too late. It had already been seen by a number of people. Peter added to his comment, "No wonder you guys were nowhere to be seen in the office this morning. It turns out there's something fishy going on." Latham's comment read, "Why do I get the feeling you're going to be in the hospital by the end of the day?" And Esther added, "Someone call an ambulance. Dorian, send us your location." Dorian flopped back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My life is over. But then he had an idea. He tossed his phone aside and went to look for Rose's. All I have to do is use her fingerprints to get into her phone and remove her from the chat. That way, she'll never know about this. He found her phone amongst the pile of clothes that had been strewn across the bedroom floor. He recalled their passionate kiss in the taxi that had led to them going back to her place. The kiss had continued all the way from the cab to her bedroom, and they had left a trail of clothing throughout the apartment. He picked up Rose's phone and took it over to the bed, where she was still sleeping peacefully. He carefully lifted her right hand, but he didn't know whether she used her thumb or her index finger to unlock her phone. He hesitated, and then he decided to test it with her thumb. It was the wrong decision, and the phone remained locked. He then tried again with her index finger, and finally it opened. Dorian heaved a sigh of relief and quickly accessed her group chat app. But right at that moment, Rose stirred and opened her eyes. Dorian had his back to her, and he seemed to be acting suspiciously. She slapped him on the shoulder and sat up in bed. "What are you doing?" He was already feeling guilty, and he jumped nervously, dropping the phone on the floor. He went to pick it up, but Rose was one step ahead of him, and she snatched it up. "Were you checking my phone?" She was about to use one of her martial arts kicks on him when she saw that her phone was open and on her group chat interface. She looked at it suspiciously and wondered why Dorian had been trying to access it. She rolled away from him and blocked his hand from snatching the device away. She pulled the blanket up and covered herself and her phone. Then she discovered what he had done. She scrolled through 20 or 30 messages, all congratulating her or joking with Dorian, until she found the original post. She flung the covers off and snarled at him. "You scumbag! You're dead!" He trembled and jumped off the bed to get away from her. She had been training since she was a child, and he knew he stood no chance against her. As if to prove it, she pounced on top of him and pinned his wrists to the floor. Both of them were still naked, and they rolled into a ball as they wrestled. Somehow, in the scuffle, the voice recording function on Rose's phone was activated, and the ensuing argument was recorded in full. "I'm so sorry, Rose.
I didn't mean to send it to the group. I was going to just send it to you, but somehow my hand slipped and... Your hand slipped. Do you seriously expect me to believe that? You do something stupid, and you actually blame your hand for it? I'm going to castrate you. I tried to do the right thing and deleted. If I hadn't done anything about it, you'd have cause to complain. But I tried to make it right. Dorian felt wronged, and Rose felt quiet. Just then, the sound of a message being sent could be heard coming from somewhere on the floor, and a puzzled expression crossed both their faces. The two of them simultaneously scrambled to find the phone, and they looked at the screen together. As they realized that their entire conversation had been recorded and sent to the group, the color drained from Rose's face, and Dorian's heart jumped into his throat again. Oh my goodness. Rose paused between each word and put her hand to her mouth in horror. She hurriedly deleted the message and the recording, but it was too late. After several seconds of awkward silence, the sound of inbound messages began. She glared at Dorian, but the anger had gone out of her, and she couldn't be bothered to go after him again. The first message came from Latham. Wow, guys, that was pretty heated. But it cut out when Rose was speaking. What happened after she blamed Dorian's hand? Next to comment was Ashley. I got to it too late and didn't hear any of it. What happened? Then it was Esther's turn. Damn it, I went to the bathroom and missed it all. Mavis typed next. I heard her say something about blaming Dorian's hand for slipping. After that, I don't know either. Rose heaved a sigh of relief. It looked as if no one had heard their argument after all. I'm confused. Is this still a parenting group? Ashley asked. Sydney sent an emoji with a zipper for a mouth, and Rose panicked. Does that mean she heard it all, but her lips are sealed? Even Hannah and Brock, who seldom sent messages to the group, joined in. It seemed that no one had heard the full conversation, and Rose began to relax again. But her relief was short-lived, as a message then came in from Helga. I heard it all. What Rose said was, Your hand slipped? Do you seriously expect me to believe that? You do something stupid, and you actually blame your hand for it. I'm going to castrate you. Then, Dorian said, I tried to do the right thing and delete it. If I hadn't done anything about it, you'd have cause to complain, but I tried to make it right. Rose watched in horror as an awkward face emoji appeared on the screen. Dorian collapsed onto the floor with his head in his hands. Helga's baby kicked inside her, and she giggled, oblivious to the damage she had just inflicted. Steve took a while to recover from the shock of how Helga had exposed Rose. He rubbed his chest to comfort himself. Fortunately, she hadn't given Rose a lecture on how to castrate a man. Steve suddenly realized that since he had been with her, he had sometimes started thinking like her. He was slightly horrified by the effect that she had had on him. He took a deep breath and decided to go to work. Work made him happy. 2 days later, the Davis Group launched a new intelligent robot. At the same time, the next series of unmanned vehicles also officially entered the testing stage. Nancy's game had also finished the research and development phase, and she had begun preparations for the final stages. Everyone was busy, and 6 months passed quickly. Life refocused for Hannah when she suddenly felt her stomach contracting in the middle of the night, over a week before her scheduled delivery. She thought that it was just a normal Braxton Hicks contraction and didn't pay much attention at first. However, when she went to the washroom, she found that she was bleeding. Brock heard her moving around and got up too. What's wrong? I think I'm in labor. Hannah looked at the dark sky outside somewhat anxiously. Maybe we should call a nurse to come over. We should go to the hospital right away. I'll call ahead so that they're ready for us. Hannah nodded. She wasn't in too much pain at that point, but Brock was afraid. He dressed quickly and grabbed clothes for her. Brock supported Hannah to the parking lot. The delivery bag that they had prepared earlier was already in the car. He helped her wrestle the seatbelt around her belly, started the car, and headed to the hospital. The gynecology department never differentiated between day and night. There were pregnant women there at all times in various stages of the birthing process. Some were walking the corridors as Brock and Hannah arrived, trying to get some degree of comfort.
Brock helped Hannah to the reception area. He had phoned ahead, and there was a room waiting for them. They sat and waited for the doctor to check on her progress. The cervix has only just started to dilate, the doctor said. You're still in the early stages. You can move around a little. A bit of exercise could be good for helping it along. Hannah nodded. It was getting painful, so she held Brock's hand tightly and let him support her as they walked back and forth across the room. Because it was midnight, it wasn't a great time to inform their friends. Brock sent a group message saying that Hannah was in labor and that they were at the hospital. He decided to wait for everyone to wake up the next morning before messaging again. Hannah didn't exercise much, and the speed at which her cervix opened was at the same reluctant pace she usually moved at. It wasn't until dawn the next day that she went into active labor. She was tired by that stage and laid on the bed while Brock fed her some ice chips between contractions.